Milan, December 12, 1969. It was an ordinary Friday afternoon, until it wasn't. A bomb rips through the heart of the city. 17 dead, dozens more wounded. Blood stains the marble floor. Chaos erupts. Confusion reigns. And then, silence. This was no isolated act. It was the spark that lit a fire, one that would burn through Italy for the next 15 years. A hidden war was unfolding between the far left and the far right, between democracy and manipulation, between revolution and terror. And behind it all, secret societies, political cover-ups, and a nation on the edge of collapse. This is the story of Italy's years of lead, and it all began right here, with a bomb in Piazza Fontana. The years of lead did not erupt out of nowhere. Their roots stretch deep into the political and social landscape of post-World War II Italy, a country torn between two global forces and facing internal struggles of identity, ideology, and power. After World War II, Italy emerged as a fragile democracy, devastated economically and socially. The United States responded by including Italy in the Marshall Plan, injecting funds to rebuild the nation and to counter Soviet influence in Western Europe. Italy quickly became a frontline state in the Cold War, firmly aligning with the Western Bloc as a founding member of NATO. However, this alignment didn't erase internal divisions.
Vogliamo una società nuova, fondata sulla fine dello sfruttamento, sulla solidarietà e fraternità.
On the contrary, Italy had one of the strongest communist parties in Europe at the time, the Partito Comunista Italiano, which drew wide support from the working class and intellectuals.
Questo è l'unico paese occidentale che ha una televisione comunista.
Alongside the Communist Party stood other major parties like the Christian Democrats, who dominated Italian politics for decades with strong support from the Catholic Church and the United States, and the Italian Socialist Party, often caught between the communists and the centrists. Meanwhile, right-wing forces such as the Italian Social Movement, a neo-fascist party, remained active, with splinter extremist groups like New Order and National Vanguard fostering underground violence. These political tensions fueled a sense of national uncertainty, and American officials grew increasingly concerned that Italy might shift to the left, especially after the electoral successes of the Italian Communist Party. By 1968, Italy was swept into the global wave of youth and worker uprisings. The Sessantotto movement, as it was known, saw students and factory workers across Italy rise up against authoritarian structures, inequality, and capitalist exploitation. Universities were occupied, most notably Rome University, which became a symbolic center of the revolt. As protests across Italy intensified in the late 1960s, so too did the state's repression. A major turning point came in December 1969, when a bombing at Piazza Fontana in Milan killed 17 people and injured 88. Initially, the attack was blamed on anarchists, but investigations later revealed it was carried out by far-right extremists. This event would come to symbolize the beginning of the so-called strategy of tension, a period marked by deliberate acts of terrorism intended to spread fear and destabilize society. In the immediate aftermath of the bombing, the police arrested several anarchists for interrogation. Among them was Giuseppe Pinelli, who died under suspicious circumstances. He fell from a fourth-floor window of the Milan police headquarters during questioning. His death ignited outrage across the country. The public reaction reached a peak during the Milan police headquarters protest at the Theatre Lirico, where demonstrators gathered to denounce police brutality and the growing authoritarianism. What began as a strike and protest quickly escalated into violent clashes between protesters and police, resulting in further casualties, including the death of a police officer. This sequence of events deepened Italy's social and political polarization, pushing the country to the edge of chaos and ushering in the so-called Years of Lead, dark chapter defined by political violence, state repression, and terrorism from both the far left and the far right. The Piazza Fontana bombing in December 1969 marked the beginning of a dark descent into chaos. Italians awoke to the reality that terrorism was no longer a foreign fear, it was now a domestic nightmare. What followed was a period of rapid escalation, where acts of violence came not only from the shadows of the far right, but increasingly from the far left as well.
Perché? Perché tutti contro Reggio? Giacomo...
In 1970, tensions boiled over in Reggio Calabria, a southern city already suffering from poverty, unemployment, and neglect. When the government announced that the regional capital of Calabria would not be Reggio, but Catanzaro, a wave of rage erupted. But this wasn't a simple protest, it was a violent uprising led by a strange alliance of right-wing militants, local workers, and disillusioned citizens. The city was paralyzed by strikes, clashes, and bombings. Trains were derailed. Police and demonstrators exchanged gunfire. This revolt exposed deep fractures in Italy's unity, North versus South, elites versus working class, left versus right. It was a warning Italy was cracking. The fallout from Piazza Fontana continued to haunt Italy. One man at the center of controversy was Police Commissioner Luigi Calabresi, who had interrogated anarchist Benelli, the man who mysteriously died by falling from a window during questioning. To many on the left, Calabresi symbolized state repression and impunity. After years of protest and accusations, including public denunciations by intellectuals and artists, Calabresi was assassinated on May 17, 1972, shot outside his home in Milan.
1972, ore 9:15, Luigi Calabresi viene ucciso con 2 colpi sparati alle spalle mentre apre la portiera della sua 500 blu.
It would take decades to convict the far-left group L'Arte Continua of the killing, but at the time, the message was clear. Violence was becoming a political tool, and both sides were now wielding it. If anyone still believed that political violence came only from the right, 1973 shattered that illusion. In the Primavel neighborhood of Rome, a Molotov cocktail was thrown into the home of Mario Matti.
Si deve purtroppo registrare un altro gravissimo episodio di violenza. Stanotte a Primavalle, alla periferia di Roma, un bambino di 8 anni, Stefano Mattei, e suo fratello Virgilio di 22 anni sono morti nell'incendio della loro casa. Un incendio doloso. Stefano e Virgilio sono i figli di Mario Mattei, segretario di una sezione del movimento sociale.
His 2 sons aged 8 and 22 were burned alive. The attackers were part of a far-left extremist group. Italy was no longer divided just by words or ballots. It was now split by flames, bullets, and blood on both extremes. If the early 1970s were a build-up, 1974 was the breaking point, a year stained with mass killings, shattered illusions, and public terror. In Brescia, a northern Italian city known for its anti-fascist tradition, a peaceful rally was held in the town square Piazza della Loggia. Trade unionists and activists gathered to protest a neo-fascist violence. As a speaker addressed the crowd, a bomb hidden in a trash bin exploded, killing 8 people and injuring over 100. The culprit, once again, far-right extremists, likely connected to Orda Nuova. The bombing wasn't just a massacre, it was a statement. No one was safe, not even in peaceful protest. Just 2 months later, terror struck again. The Italicus Express was a night train traveling from Rome to Munich, filled with holiday travelers. As it passed through a tunnel near Bologna, a time bomb detonated in one of the carriages, killing 12 people and injuring dozens more. The blast was so intense it ripped the train open in the dark mountain tunnel. The perpetrators, once again, far-right networks, trying to provoke fear and disorder, part of what many believe was a strategia dell'attention, a plan to destabilize democracy and push Italy toward authoritarian control. By the mid-1970s, Italy was no longer just unstable, it was on the edge. The streets had become ideological battlegrounds, and the language of politics had turned into the language of weapons. In 1977, the student movement, once idealistic and peaceful, had morphed into a radical, angry, and armed wave. In Bologna, a left-wing stronghold, thousands of students took to the streets to protest rising authoritarianism, economic inequality, and state violence, but the protests quickly escalated. On 11 March, police shot and killed Francesco Lorusso, a member of the radical group Latte Continuo. Bologna exploded, university buildings were occupied, cars torched, and confrontations with police turned violent. Even Radio Alice, a pirate station run by autonomous students, was shut down by force.
Con le mani alzate, siamo entrati, siamo con le mani alzate. Il microfono. Abbiamo le mani in alto.
Then came 1978, the year when terror didn't just strike randomly, it entered the very heart of the Republic. On March 16, 1978, just hours before a historic political agreement was to be finalized, a group of heavily armed men ambushed a car convoy in central Rome. The attackers, members of the Red Brigades, Italy's most feared far-left terrorist group, executed 5 bodyguards and kidnapped Aldo Moro.
Buongiorno, il presidente della Democrazia Cristiana Aldo Moro è stato rapito questa mattina alle 9:10 da un
But this wasn't just any politician.
Leggermente di traverso. L'autista che guidava la vettura con a bordo Moro ha sterzato verso destra, ma non è riuscito ad evitare.
Aldo Moro was the architect of the Compromesso Storico historic compromise, a groundbreaking deal to bring the Communist Party into a coalition government for the first time in Western Europe during the Cold War. To the Red Brigades, this was betrayal. In their eyes, Moro's compromise was not progress, it was proof that the system had co-opted the revolution. For 55 days, Italy held its breath. The Red Brigades released photos of a pale, imprisoned Moro holding newspapers. They issued statements demanding the release of imprisoned militants, but the government refused to negotiate.
Che ci accomuna, cioè una eguale concezione dell'uomo, del mondo, della società.
But on May 9, 1978, the nightmare ended not with Moro's release, but with his lifeless body found in the trunk of a red Renault 4, parked halfway between the headquarters of the Communists and the Christian Democrats.
Adempiamo alle ultime volontà, comunicando alla famiglia dove potrà trovare il corpo dell'onorevole Aldo Moro.
The message was cruel and clear. No compromise, no mercy, no peace. Moro's death sent shockwaves through Italy and the world. It was no longer just about ideology or politics. It was a national trauma wound that would scar a generation. By 1980, Italy was exhausted, but the worst was yet to come. On a hot Saturday morning, Bologna's Central railway station was crowded with holiday travelers. At 10:25 a.m., a powerful bomb hidden inside a suitcase detonated in the station's waiting room. 85 people killed, Over 200 wounded and the station was destroyed, and the city fell silent in shock. This wasn't just another attack, it was the deadliest act of terrorism in Italian history.
Sono le 10:25 del 2 agosto 1980. Una bomba posta nella sala d'aspetto della stazione centrale di Bologna provoca una devastante esplosione, causando la morte di 85 persone e il ferimento di altre 200.
Investigations eventually traced the bombing to neo-fascist militants, specifically members of the Nuclei Armati Rivoluzionari, a far-right extremist group, but rumors swirled of state collusion, intelligence cover-ups, and connections to secret organizations. The Bologna bombing became the symbolic climax of the years of lead. Just when Italians thought they had seen it all, a new scandal erupted not from the streets, but from the shadows. During an unrelated investigation, police raided the home of Licio Galli, a businessman and suspected fixer. There, they found a list of members of a secret Masonic lodge, Propaganda Due. It included top-ranking military officers, politicians and ministers, judges, bankers, intelligence officials, and even the future Prime Minister, Silvio Berlusconi.
Propaganda Due, DUE, was described by Italian magistrates as a state within a state. In addition to the 3 cabinet ministers, its reach extended to 2 undersecretaries, 30 members of parliament, military officers, diplomats, magistrates, professors, and journalists. The problem was not that so many leading members of government belonged to a Masonic lodge, it was that they belonged secretly, and in Italy, secret societies are illegal.
Propaganda Due wasn't just a club, it was a parallel state, accused of manipulating Italian democracy, infiltrating institutions, and covering up terrorist acts, including Bologna. The revelation shattered public trust. Italy now had to confront a terrifying question. Were we ever really in control of our own country? By 1982, the tide had turned. The Red Brigades, once feared and widespread, were broken. Most of their historic leaders, including Mario Moretti, Valerio Marucci, and others, were arrested. Some former militants began to collaborate with the authorities, revealing names, hideouts, and strategies. By the mid-1980s, the political violence that had scarred Italy for nearly 2 decades was in steep decline. The left-wing terrorism collapsed under the weight of arrests and disillusionment. The right-wing terrorism faded into infamy and mystery, forever tied to massacres and conspiracies. Italy had lost hundreds of lives, endured dozens of attacks, and carried a collective trauma it still hasn't fully processed.